The rise of Macedon, from a small kingdom at the periphery of classical Greek affairs to one which came to dominate the entire Hellenic world, occurred in the space of just 25 years, between 359 and 336 BC. This ascendancy is largely attributable to the personality and policies of Philip II. Background: Greece in the early 4th century BC. In the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, the militaristic city-state of Sparta had been able to impose a hegemony over the heartland of classical Greece, the states of this area having been severely weakened by the war. This state of affairs was resented by many of the Greek city-states, which had traditionally been ferociously independent, and led directly to the Corinthian War of 395–387 BC. The fragility of Spartan dominance had been demonstrated, however, and in the next decade, the Thebans would revolt against Sparta. The Spartans were unable to successfully quell the revolt, leading to de facto Theban independence. Then, after several years of desultory conflict, the Thebans finally met the Spartans in open battle at Leuctra, and under the leadership of Epaminondas inflicted an unprecedented defeat on the Spartan army, killing the Spartan king Cleombrotus I in the process. Following up on this victory, Epaminondas invaded Peloponnesus in 370 BC and began dismantling the basis of Spartan dominance. Spartan power rested on the forced labor of the Helots of Messenia, which allowed the entire male Spartan population to dedicate themselves to warfare. This focused military training system had previously enabled Sparta to exert power out of proportion with its small population. However, after their losses at Leuctra, the Spartans were unable to resist Epaminondas's invasion, and he marched into Messenia and liberated the Helots, thereby permanently crippling Sparta. The Thebans then began to extend their influence over Greece, effectively replacing the Spartan hegemony with their own. The Theban generals Pelopidas and Epaminondas campaigned all over Greece for the next 9 years to further Theban power and influence. In 362 BC, Epaminondas's fourth invasion of the Peloponnesus, which reached its climax at the Battle of Mantinea, brought almost every state in Greece into the conflict, on one side or the other. Although the Thebans and their allies were victorious at Mantinea, Epaminondas was killed, and Theban losses were heavy. Xenophon, summing up his account of Mantinea, suggests that, when these things had taken place, the opposite of what all men believed would happen was brought to pass. For since well nigh all the people of Greece had come together and formed themselves in opposing lines, there was no one who did not suppose that if a battle were fought, those who proved victorious would be the rulers and those who were defeated would be their subjects. But the deity so ordered, that while each party claimed to be victorious, neither was found to be any better off. But that there was even more confusion and disorder in Greece after the battle than before. Xenophon. The years of conflict which resulted from the Theban attempts to reorganize Greece had left much of the country war-weary and exhausted. A general peace was therefore concluded between all the states of Greece in the aftermath of Mantinea. With the death of Epaminondas and significant loss of manpower at Mantinea, the Thebans returned to their more traditional defensive policy, and within a few years, Athens had replaced him at the pinnacle of the Greek political system, and Theban influence faded quickly in the rest of Greece. It was the Athenians, and their second confederacy, who would be Macedon's main rivals for control of the lands of the North Aegean. And a major theme during the period was the regular state of war between Macedon and Athens. Macedonia in the early 4th century BC. Philip's succession in 360 BC. The Macedonian army under Perdiccas III had been defeated in battle by the Dardanian tribe of Illyria. Perdiccas and 4,000 troops had been killed. The Illyrians began to prepare to invade Macedon. Meanwhile, the Paeonians were ravaging Macedonian territory. The Thracians were preparing to invade in support of the pretender Pausanias, as were the Athenians, in support of a different pretender, Argeus. In short, Macedon was in another of its periodic crises. The nominal heir of Perdiccas, his son Amyntas IV, was only an infant. Philip, the sole surviving son of Amyntas III, was the obvious candidate to rule Macedon and was acclaimed by the army, probably as king. Either way, Philip became king by 359 BC, and began energetically attempting to save Macedon from destruction. The Macedonian recovery. He held a series of assemblies with the Macedonian people, and, exhorting them with eloquent speeches to be men, he built up their morale. He exhaustively retrained his men with new tactics and equipment. In particular, he instigated the use of the phalanx formation by the Macedonian foot soldiery, and equipped the troops with 6-meter-long pikes, in contrast to the 2 to 3 meter spear used by Greek hoplites. Diplomacy. At the same time, Philip engaged in a flurry of diplomatic activity. He bribed Berisades, son of the Thracian king Kordas, to withdraw Thracian support for Pausanias, and thereby prevented the Thracian invasion. Similarly, he bought off the Paeonians with gifts in exchange for their withdrawal from Macedon. Philip may also have concluded a treaty with the victorious Dardanian king Badulides, possibly surrendering large parts of Macedon in exchange for peace, although no evidence remains of such a treaty. The fact that Illyrians did not follow up their victory despite Macedon's weakness is suggestive that some agreement was reached. Philip also married Badulis's daughter, which may have formed part of the treaty. At any rate, Philip's diplomacy gave Macedon some breathing space and time for recovery. Battle of Methlen. Philip realized that the sole intention of the Athenian support for Argius was to recover Amphipolis, which they hoped to do by placing Argius on the throne. Philip therefore withdrew the Macedonian garrison from Amphipolis and declared it autonomous, to undermine the purpose of Athenian support for Argius. The Athenian expedition, led by Marsyas, still landed at Methven on the Macedonian coast, with 3,000 mercenary troops. Marsyas now declined to leave Methven, so Argius instead led the troops to the ancient Macedonian capital of Aegae, hoping that the populace would declare him king. However, the people of Aegae showed no interest in doing so, and Argius therefore marched back to Methven. On the way, he was attacked and defeated in battle by Philip, many of the Athenian mercenaries being slain and the rest taken captive. According to Diodorus, this victory did much to restore the morale of the Macedonian army, and gave the soldiers encouragement for the battles to come. Having defeated the last immediate threat to Macedon, Philip returned to diplomacy. He released the Athenian prisoners immediately, and sent ambassadors to Athens. He was prepared to abandon all claim to Amphipolis, and this, coupled with his treatment of the Athenian prisoners, persuaded the Athenians to make peace with him. Paeonia and Illyria. The following year, Philip heard that the Paeonian king, Agis, had died. Philip was now able to turn to the Illyrians, who were still occupying much of Upper Macedon. He held an assembly of the army, gathered together a force of 10,000 men and 600 cavalry and marched into Illyria. Badulides, hearing of the preparations, sent ambassadors to Philip, proposing peace on the basis of the status quo. Philip rejected this, insisting that the Illyrians must withdraw completely of Macedonia, so Badulides instead prepared for battle, raising 10,000 men and 500 cavalry, according to Diodorus. Diodorus preserves the only account of the battle, which Belloc suggested may have taken place near Monastir. He says that, when the armies approached each other and with a great outcry clashed in the battle, Philip, commanding the right wing, which consisted of the flower of the Macedonians serving under him, ordered his cavalry to ride past the ranks of the barbarians and attack them on the flank, while he himself, falling on the enemy in a frontal assault, began a bitter combat. But the Illyrians, forming themselves into a square, courageously entered the fray, and at first for a long while the battle was evenly poised because of the exceeding gallantry displayed on both sides. and as many were slain and still more wounded. The fortune of battle vacillated first one way then the other, being constantly swayed by the valorous deeds of the combatants, but later as the horsemen pressed on from the flank and rear and Philip with the flower of his troops fought with true heroism, the mass of the Illyrians was compelled to take hastily to flight. Diodorus Siculus. According to Diodorus, some 7,000 Illyrians died in the battle. The Illyrians withdrew from Macedon and sued for peace. After this campaign, Philip had established his authority inland as far as Lake Kordas and gained the favor of the Epirots, who has also been at war with the Illyrians. Thessaly. Justin and Diodorus both say that Philip also invaded Thessaly in 358 BC. In the years up to 370 BC, Thessaly had enjoyed a brief ascendancy in the Greek world, after being unified under Jason of Pherae, who was appointed Targus of Thessaly. However, Jason was assassinated in 370 BC, and his son Alexander became Targus. Alexander ruled harshly, and other states of the Thessalian League therefore withdrew their support for him, resulting in a desultory conflict in which both Macedon and eventually Thebes became embroiled. This conflict eventually ended in 364 BC when the Thebans were victorious over Alexander, and imposed a peace settlement on Thessaly. However, with the weakening of Thebes in the aftermath of Mantinea, on-off conflict within Thessaly continued. Alexander was himself assassinated in 358 BC, by his wife's brothers Lycophron and Ctesiphonus, who became tyrants in his place. According to Diodorus, the Illuidae, the noble family which dominated politics in the northern Thessalian city of Larissa, were opposed to these new tyrants, and requested Philip to aid them. Although Diodorus says that Philip defeated the new tyrants, Buckler considers it more likely that Philip's appearance on the scene allowed the Illuidae to negotiate a peace settlement with Pherae from a position of greater strength. Philip seems to have come away from the expedition with new wives from both Larissa and Pherae, which is suggestive of a negotiated settlement. Certainly, as Buckler says, Philip came away from Thessaly with a foot in both camps. Philip appears to have had a strong interest in Thessaly from the start of his reign, even despite his problems elsewhere. There are several probable reasons for this interest. Firstly, and most pressingly, Philip probably wanted to take control of the border region of Peribia, in order to secure Macedon's southern border. Secondly, since Larissa controlled the main north-south routes between Macedon and Thessaly, friendly relations with the Illuidae would help protect Macedon and give Philip access to the rest of Greece. Thirdly, Thessaly had plentiful resources that Philip could see the long-term potential of exploiting. Thessaly was rich in land, produced cities and men. Thessalian cavalry was the best in Greece, and the mountainous country surrounding Thessaly supplied numerous peltasts. Success in Thessaly would provide Philip with a new army and additional revenues. Nor could he wisely stand by and watch the tyrants of Pherae overwhelm the Thessalian confederacy. Jason of Pherae had given the Greek world a glimpse of the potential might of a united Thessaly, and no Macedonian king could afford to forget the lesson. John Buckler, summary to 358 BC. Through his frenetic activity since coming to the throne, Philip had successfully shored up the Macedonian situation, defeating or making peace with Macedon's erstwhile enemies, whilst securing most of Macedon's borders, and revitalizing and retraining his army.